if everyone could stand so that we could say the pledge to the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Maureen, could you please call the roll?
Kimberly Page.
Here.
Larry Cerisi.
Here.
Linda Avanzato.
Here.
John Biscardin.
Here.
Cheryl Clarkin. Here. Robert Jones. Here. William Mudge.
Here.
Julia Held.
Here.
Student Representative. Thank you.
Maureen, could you please go over the calendars?
January 28th, Professional Development Day, no school for students. January 29th, Wellness Committee meeting, 3:30 p.m., Stony Lane School. January 31st, Facility Subcommittee meeting, 4 p.m., Central Administration Building. February 5th, School Committee Budget meeting, 7 p.m., North Kingstown High School Cafeteria. February 11th, Policy Subcommittee meeting, 9 a.m., Central Administration Building. February 12th, School Committee Work Session, 7 p.m., North Kingstown High School Cafeteria. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. All right. That brings us up to presentations and recognitions. Dr. Ajay, do you have anything that you would like to share? And I know some other folks do.
I do not have anything this evening. Thank you.
Mr. Biscardin, you told me earlier you did?
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Page. On Saturday, January 12th, I was honored to be present for the Eagle Scout Court of Honor for Troop 147 in Quidnesset. It was held at the Varnum Armory at Main Street in East Greenwich. And Adam Daglieri, Kiffin Ward, Ethan Spearman, Peter Aulette, and Andrew Nicastro all were honored with awarded with their Eagle Scout merit badge. That's not an easy thing. I mean, those guys worked very hard, very long, and what's even more impressive, they had decided on doing this quite a long time ago, and it was a wonderful presentation. There was actually, what I found was the most interesting, that they had 26 other Eagle Scouts, and some of them actually flew in for the presentation. So they were in very warm company, and I was very honored to be there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, John, for making sure that you were the representative for the school committee. Appreciate that. Anybody else have anything that they would like to share for presentations or recognitions? I know it came out on the listserv, but we did have quite a few silver and gold key winners. We had two people who won the gold key, one of them twice. Tally Larkin won the gold key in the arts for both drawing and photography, and Hope Johnson won a gold key for ceramics and glass. And then for the silver keys, we had Brian Flanagan for photography. We had Kayla Kennedy for drawing, Young Sup Lee for painting, Brittany Leone for drawing, Tara Petrie for ceramics and glass, and Lily Wright also for drawing. So congratulations to them. It's always nice to see our students there. All right. If there's nothing else, that moves us into superintendent's report. Dr. Ajay.
I'm actually all set for tonight. Thank you.
All right. We are moving right along here, folks. Scary. All right. That brings us to routine items and to the executive session. We first have, I'm looking for a motion to seal the executive session minutes for tonight, January 2nd, 2013.
So moved.
Second. All right, is there any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed?
Abstain.
Thank you. Motion passes. All right, that brings us to the consent agenda, or actually, no, I'm sorry, before that, Lorraine, do we have any disclosure of executive session votes?
Just the one vote. All members were present at tonight's executive session except for Bill Mudge. Motion by Linda Avanzato to adjourn executive session and go into open, seconded by John Biscardin. The vote was the motion passed 6-0. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that brings us to the consent agenda. Who has things to exempt from the consent agenda? Mr. Jones?
I would like to exempt item D.
All right. Anything else to exempt? All right. Seeing no other hands, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve?
Second.
All right. So we have a motion to approve and a second. Lorraine, could we take a roll call vote, please?
Linda Avanzato.
Yes.
John Biscardin.
Yes.
Larry Cerisi.
Abstain.
Cheryl Clarkin.
Yes.
Robert Jones.
Yes.
William Mudge.
Yes.
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-1. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Jones, you wanted to talk about the North Kingstown High School Program of Studies, and I believe I saw Dr. Mansouri here tonight.
And Dr. Kenworthy.
And Dr. Kenworthy. Sorry, Dr. Kenworthy, not to overlook you. And this is what I would say, because we have other things on our agenda here tonight that we're going to be talking about, is let's make sure as we're going through the agenda that we put most of our questions to Dr. Ajay. And then if Dr. Ajay needs to ask a question of somebody who's here, he can do that. But most of our questions should go through the superintendent.
If I could just begin with a very brief introduction. This is something that occurs every year, particularly if there are changes to the program of studies, and this is a pretty comprehensive list, and basically includes those things that would be changed. Otherwise, the document is pretty much the same as it has been.
Mr. Jones, you had something you wanted to bring up.
And thank you for attending too, and I appreciate the summary that was provided. It helps, I think, not only us but parents and other interested folks to summarize a very large document. I guess, Doctor, just a couple of questions. In thinking about for the class of 2015, and just to help my understanding with the changeover to the Common Core, so as a graduation requirement, when exactly are kneecaps going away? And then, what exactly would be the requirements for the class of 2015 in terms of that?
I'm going to let my trusty assistant superintendent handle that one. She's been right on top of it.
Actually, RIDE just came out with the whole progression of how that's going to play out with the kneecap being replaced by the PARCC test. So the PARCC is scheduled for 2014-2015 school year. The actual test that's mandatory is going to be in the spring of 2015. So the high school will have an opportunity. The juniors will take their kneecap. So the juniors that will be taking it in the spring of 2014. I think it's 2014. Will get to repeat and have the opportunity to take it again in the spring. But each year is laid out, so it's a little bit complicated, but I can provide that for you.
You want to fill in, Denise and Tom, you want to fill in some of the, you know this intimately, so.
So, Mr. Jones, if your question was about graduation requirements in general, the kneecap in transition to the PARCC is just one piece of that. The other pieces that we have in place, for all classes currently, something that hasn't changed, I don't foresee changing, is a minimum credit requirement. So all students have 28 credit opportunities before they graduate. And to earn a diploma from North Kingstown High School, students need to have attained 24 credits, and there are some mandatories. They must hit 4 years of math, 4 years of English, so forth. We've got the kneecap and then transition to the park requirement. And then in addition, every high school in the state of Rhode Island is required to have 2 proficiency-based graduation requirements. So currently we have senior project and e-portfolio in place for all classes. And then the change that's going to start there is with our current freshman class, which is the class of 2016. And they'll be transitioning away from e-portfolio. We've got, actually that transition is starting to take place now. And then they'll be more fully aware of that as they progress through the rest of their high school career. But so they'll have as their 2 proficiency-based graduation measures, senior project, and then what's known as comprehensive course assessments. In some ways similar to the e-portfolio system, but without the electronic uploading.
No, thank you. And specifically, yeah, I was just, my main focus was on, because I think it is well laid out in the document, just the transition from kneecap to park and students, in that junior class who maybe don't meet it and their ability to satisfy requirements. So that was my main focus there. Another question, just, I noticed on things like the math elective or different courses they can take, is there a thought at some point or the ability, instead of taking accounting 1 and 2, if I'm actually out there and I get an internship possibly, doing bookkeeping is there a way that you foresee down the road that there's opportunities for practicum or experiential learning to replace, some of these credit hour course structures?
Yes. Well, right now, currently we have the internship program in senior year. And so they can go out 5th period in the day. And we are also working with Barbara Jackson, and she's helping us to get together career readiness programs, and we're working to do something next summer on that, and also to be able to provide that. But right now it's limited because the way our schedule is with our bells and when we can have the students going out, but we are looking forward to making alternatives.
Right. So do you envision perhaps, the ability to customize a program? Maybe it's over the summer, maybe it's some other way to down the road satisfy some of these requirements?
Yes, actually, we are working with Barbara Jackson. It's a whole manufacturing loop, and it's a higher level. It's not dirty manufacturing. She has this whole big process worked out. And we are working right now with the careers department to try to look at our, it's called College and Career Ready. And so a lot of the classes that we teach right now, there's certain things that the employers are looking for, and if you take, we are basically doing an audit, looking at the classes that we have and the classes that, the necessary skills that you need to have in order to be successful, and for these employers to say, yes, we're going to put the money and we're going to hire your students and have them come into our program, you have to have this certain certificate, and it's a certain amount of hours. So not only are we looking through the careers department to get the skills, we're also looking into things like Saturday mornings, having somebody come in and to kind of just fill in different skills that the students might not have right now because we don't offer the particular class.
If I could piggyback on that a little bit, there's an ongoing process that, whether it's an internship experience or a particular course, that we have kind of an internal process to decide whether that fulfills a 4th math requirement. So you would take 3, real math classes, as we all know them, and then a 4th math requirement could be something like a chemistry course or a physics course, but it could be a career and tech course that's heavy in math. It could be include the internship component of that. It's a matter of seeing what the school has and doing kind of a yearly process of saying, okay, of all the things that we have, what are those options that we have that would fulfill a 4th math requirement, and then to get RIDE to okay that, to be convinced that indeed is what we have in mind when we say a 4th math requirement.
I just had one question. I noticed the math was like a 4 credit, 4 years, and science is only 3.
Right. That's Rhode Island Department of Ed regulation.
That's a minimum of 3.
Right.
Yeah, and I was just kind of wondering, with the president and, the governor's, push for science and everything else, why that's still at 3 and not at 4.
Regarding North Kingstown requiring it?
Right.
Well, I think what we have so many required courses. The most recent one was democracy. And so what we try to do is allow a certain amount of electives, choices for our students, depending on where they choose to do in college. So if you're looking to go into STEM education, and there'll be plenty of opportunities, because if you do look at, it's a really big document that I sent, there's quite a few electives in the science area, but if you're looking for somebody to be liberal arts or to have it something to do with the arts, I would hate to have them go down a road that they didn't necessarily want to go. So that's usually a process that we'd go through ILT, which is our leadership team, and we would add more in. But as of right now, the last one we did was democracy. I think the last time we tried to get finance as a class for everyone to take, and I think most parents would be very interested in that, and we, again, had to stop it and to say, look, we need to have some choice for the students. Otherwise, every year it's directed, and as they go up in higher levels, by the time they're seniors, they have quite a few choices.
We, one of the issues that we have all the time, having a fourth science is a great idea, but so is having a personal finance requirement, so is having another year of history, and they go on. And it seems like every subject matter has an idea about, boy, wouldn't this be a great mandatory class to add this piece? And you get to a point where there's no more room in the schedule, and the kids don't have any more choice in their electives. So some pretty good ideas don't necessarily get to become mandatory ideas. And I've been dealing with that ever since I was an assistant principal of a high school, and it seemed like every year there was a pitch for some new mandatory requirement, and a lot of the rest of the school was resisting it, because if that's a course that everyone has to take, then there's a whole slew of courses that kids will not be taking anymore. And those are also valuable, particularly as a choice if the kids want to go down that road.
I saw Mr. Bustard and then Mrs. Ovens-Otto.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, it seems whenever you phase something out and try to roll something up into it, there tends to be something falls through the cracks. The way this is, I'm not saying that that's what this is, but is there enough overlap or redundancy or enough so we don't mistakenly, somebody misses the opportunity to take either the kneecap when it's, or roll into the park? I mean, it seems to me there could be a chance where somebody could conceivably...
Well, the key to this is that you cannot fall through the cracks and miss out on something essential that is tested on the kneecap or the park.
Actually, if I could just add something, specifically when we get the scores coming out at the beginning of February, working together with Dr. Humbert and Dr. Kenworthy, and we're going to be looking at every score of a student that wasn't where they should be, and they're going to be in remediation. So nobody is falling through the cracks as far as kneecap goes.
Okay, I just want to...
And the whole idea of that fourth math is the point being that, the maths that you need to take need to cover, the material on the kneecap test, because if it doesn't, you're not being fair to a student who hasn't been taught the material, first of all, but is held accountable for their graduation to pass that test. But then, putting this in context, back in 2000, when I was starting as an assistant principal, the school that I was at had 2 math requirements, and they could be, and neither of them even had to be algebra 1. It could be something like business math and everyday math or something like that. And a lot of schools had that. And now the kneecap came in, and before the kneecap was the NSRE, and they had these requirements that included algebra 2. And so it's unfair to have a student just taking business class when they're responsible for algebra 2 on something that they need to graduate. So that's the spirit of all this, that you need to cover this material and you need to pass it and do well so you're prepared. And if you don't pass the kneecap or the park that's coming in your junior year, then you are responsible to do the kinds of things you need to do to be ready for it when it comes at you at a senior year, or you're not going to be able to graduate.
Right. I'm not...
And that may prevent you from taking an elective that you would find near and dear to your heart, unfortunately.
Right, and I'm going to jump in here because one of the things that I've seen is that for the kids who are in 8th grade who are looking like they're struggling a little bit of math. So sometimes they come in and they'll take Algebra 1 as a freshman, and they'll also take Algebra 1 lab. So technically, they end up having 2 maths. So that they can, so basically what that does is that then they have math every day. So it's that reinforcer that they don't have a day 1 have math and then not a day. They have day 1 they have algebra, day 2 they have lab, day 1 so every day they have math, and it's to keep them up to par. And then what I've also seen is that in 10th grade, when they look again, then they're constantly testing the kids on some of these other sort of things just to say, how are you doing in reading? And when they don't, when they're not performing as well as they should in reading, they take them out and say, you should probably go to a reading comprehension class. So let's rearrange your schedule, see how you can fit in here, and let's make sure that by the time you get to the kneecap park, that you're up to where you need to be.
Thank you. Yes.
And I've seen some of those things, and I think they worked very well. And you know, I think you all are doing a great job at that. So that's what I have seen. How they've looked at that. They looked at the kids. So before they get to their junior year, they see that. They make sure that there's So we're not waiting until it's junior year. And oh, by the way, now you've taken kneecap, and now you haven't done very well.
My concern was just somebody, for whatever quirk in the system, that somebody missed.
I understand.
And then they don't know they missed it until typically it's too late. So thank you. I'm sure you'll make sure it doesn't happen.
Mr. Jones. I'm sorry, Mrs. Avanzato. I do even have I have your initials here. I'm sorry.
That's okay, no problem. Just the packet information is great, very comprehensive. I really appreciate it. And I think the point about keeping the science at 3 is probably well taken if you have a lot of students that may not be going into that, and then they've got 4 maths and 4 science. That may be an overload for some students that are headed into different areas. One comment, I'm very excited to hear about working on the VOTEC kind of opportunities, internship kind of opportunities. I think that's where a lot of colleges are going. I know that like Northeastern University has become immensely popular because of that, and it's just helpful in the job market for kids when they get out. And I like to see that. I just want to make sure, too, that and I know you are looking at that we're looking at students that may not be going to college, maybe just be going directly into different vocational careers, and I know that's part of what you're doing. Yes. So I'm really happy to see that emphasis start and the partnership being developed with Barbara Jackson. So
we're hoping.
That's
we're
a great.
It's successful.
Hoping so. Thank
you. I will note, too, just for those of you that are concerned budgetarily, everything in here, there's no added FTEs. Everything's under, we're working within our means and everything that we have. Most of it is cosmetic and something to keep up with either NEASC requirements or RIDE regulations and so forth. So.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I wasn't going to ask that, but thank you. And I did appreciate the line about regularly reviewing electives. I know there's always a trade-off between wanting to offer a lot and the just fundamental business requirements of having students in the seat to justify the personnel. I think my final one, just a question, and I'm going to preface it by saying, as someone who went to an undergrad institution that required 12 credit hours of PE to include boxing and swimming and wrestling, I'm just curious, though, I applaud the health part and the goals of the PE part. I'm curious whether students who are, certified varsity, athletes can receive, credit for the PE part, and looking through what the requirements are, to get them moving and active and accustomed to team kind of stuff. I mean, it seems to me that varsity athletes kind of get that already. And, would it provide the flexibility if they're certified getting that already through the team sport concept, to allow a little more focus on those students who are not participating via that route, and also just to give those students a little more flexibility, like Dr. Ojay was saying, you can't, fit everything you'd like into. Is that one area possibly we could look at giving those students a little more flexibility on their academic side?
Unfortunately, that's not allowed by Rhode Island Department of Education.
Okay.
You need to get that changed.
Yeah, next thing we talk to. So, okay, thank you. So, and again, thank you for the comprehensive thing. I hope parents take the time to at least read the summary and do that.
Thank you.
All right. Do I have a motion to approve?
So move.
Second.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctors Manseri and Kenworthy.
All right, that brings us to the end of our consent agenda, and it brings us to the first item, the 2013-2014 school budget.
Do you mind if we take this out of order and do the transportation audit first?
No, not at all.
We don't have anything on the school budget tonight, but I'm sure there may be a couple of questions following up on last week, but there are people here to discuss the transportation audit, so maybe.
That'd be fine.
Okay.
There's no objection by the school committee, is there?
I just had clarification when we say 2013-14 school budget. Is that the current budget or both of your budgets, or which budget specifically is that?
No, we usually, because it crosses over school years, we usually call it 12-13 or 13-14, so that's next year's budget.
Next year's budget. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So go by the last number is the FY14.
All right, if I don't see any, like I said, we will come back to this, so why don't we skip right to the transportation audit, and Dr. Auger and Mrs. King, I'm not sure which one of you is doing the talking.
Well, I just want to thank Mrs. King and Mr. Horan for all of their work in working with Transpar to, see this audit through. It presents a lot of work for them. Even though Transpar is doing, the majority of the number crunching and analysis, obviously. And, the report that they have given to us is pretty comprehensive, and I also appreciate, the couple of pages of notes that we have beforehand that kind of walks us through the highlights from Mrs. King, and I know Mr. Horan helped with that as well. So I appreciate that, and I'm going to pass this off to Mrs. King.
Just as a way of a little bit of background, back at the end of September, I believe it was, the school committee wanted to engage Transpar Group to do an audit of our transportation system. Clearly, it's not as nitty-gritty as it could be. Those audits can cost tens of thousands of dollars. But Transpar Group has been involved in transportation in the state of Rhode Island, and they were a good group to provide this data. There are two pieces to our transportation system that I think it's important for us to keep in mind, and sometimes we get confused. There's what we call the big buses, okay? Those are our contracted buses. They're not employees, they are contracted out, and those are for in-district transportation. Then there are the minibuses. Those are ours. Those are out-of-district busing, and that is the piece that some districts have outsourced to the state for statewide busing. So really the first part of this audit, the first 11 pages are really the summary. And I would like to also thank Mr. Horan, our transportation manager, because as you can see in this audit, there were many commendations to the way that he is managing our transportation function in North Kingstown, and I think that he's done an excellent job, and he did most of the work on this. This did take quite a bit of time answering questions with Transpar, and I appreciate his time, and I also appreciate the commendations that were given to John. I think that they're well-deserved. Other than that, you have our comments. Mr. Horan also prepared the charts that Dr. Auger forwarded to you that compare us to the state. They compare us to all suburbs. They compare us to just suburban districts that are within our land area, because that's very, very important as well. It's a key component. For example, if you take a look at a Pawtucket, for example, very small city, but also, too, what a lot of people don't know is Pawtucket does not bus secondary students. So when you start doing some comparisons, even Transpar had said that it's sometimes difficult to compare because you're not always doing apples to apples, and you have to make sure that you're looking in depth at that. The data, those charts and information that Mr. Horn put together, I want to comment again, that is only a comparison to our big buses in district. There is no readily available, and I have asked RIDE for the information. What Mr. Horn did to get this in-district information is he went into every single district into a particular Uniform Chart of Accounts code and pulled out that number and compared that and put together their student count and got it per pupil. Okay, so that's what had to be done. There isn't a separate report that RIDE creates for that. For the out-of-district, our minibuses, that data is not available at this time. FY12 is the first year that districts are required to break out that out-of-district transportation cost. So I have asked a contact at RIDE if I could get that per pupil information. I have not heard back from her. So again, that is our in-district. I don't want us to get confused because sometimes it does get confusing. Other than that, I guess we can just open for questions. There was a lot of data that Transpar provided, a lot of analysis, a lot of charts, and I'm sure that people have questions on it, some that we can answer, some that we may need to get back to you on.
If I could just piggyback a couple of comments, I was impressed by, the level of analysis that came out of the Transpar audit. I was very happy to find out that there were a number of commendations for the district, and I was struck by this chart that we have been able to obtain that shows us in comparison to other districts in the state. And just to give members of the public out there a chance to appreciate what this comparison data tells us.
Excuse me.
What page is the chart?
This is something that I forwarded to Mr. Jones at his request.
It's not in this.
It's not in the report.
Okay.
That's what we can't.
I apologize for that.
Only Bob.
And it basically points out that we like Mrs. King said, we would compare ourselves to particular groups based on, the fact that we're a suburban district and we're of a certain size. There are 22 suburban districts, and we're the third largest in land size, and about the seventh in terms of, or seventh in terms of land size and third in terms of enrollment. And you would consider that a district like that would have a higher per pupil cost than most of the districts, when in fact we're right in the middle of that group. That data alone, the number of students we need to transport and the size of our district, so the mileage that our buses need to put in to get to the kids, would indicate that we would probably be somewhere between third and seventh in terms of our cost, when in fact we're 11th out of 22, right in the middle. And of the 7 districts that are roughly the same size that we are, we're the tops in that group, most efficient in terms of cost. So those are good signals, and there are a number of commendations on this report that are also very good signals. So I'm very happy with that. It's not that we don't have some things that we could probably learn from here and make a little bit better, but I'm very happy to know that, we start into this in good shape as I see it, relatively speaking.
All right, so what I thought we would do is, again, we will, as we did last time we met with some questions, is we'll go down the table with questions. I would like your questions to be directed to either Dr. Ajay or Mrs. King, and so, Mr. Shreesi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to go back for a second on the history of this audit report. This was actually initiated by the previous school committee back when we reconfigured the schools from K-3 to K-5, and obviously required quite a lot of work from the administration, the school committee, and mostly the transportation director. So that's where this audit request originated from, and it actually, obviously ended up on the back burner with the committee and the administration as well, with other issues that needed to be addressed at the time that took precedence over this. One of the things I just want to say is that, we, well, too often, including myself, we tend to focus on the recommendations rather than the accommodation. I'm sorry. That's right. The accommodations. So I do want to just take a quick moment and recognize, as Dr. Roger and Mrs. King recognized, the work that Mr. Horan does and has put into transportation. It's probably the least favorable job in the district, because I would say no matter what recommendation or decision you make, certainly somebody on the other side is going to get upset. For every every neighborhood you accommodate, there's a neighborhood that you're upset. So it's a very difficult balancing act, and certainly not a job that I would want to have. So I did want to take a moment to make those comments. As far as the report itself, there are a couple of areas in there, and we spend a lot of time putting out an RFP for these reports, and we pay money for these reports, and I certainly don't want it to be one of those things that, okay, we went through that process and we put it up on a shelf and now it collects dust. It's certainly something that, and I'm not suggesting that anyone would do that, but certainly that some of the recommendations in here I would like to see us address. And some of the recommendations, quite frankly, that are made in here, they're not realistic, and I think that they're not realistic because some of the recommendations are being made by an independent third party, which is what we want, and that's great. But, to have a thorough, in-depth knowledge of the day-to-day operations of the transportation system, sometimes those recommendations that are made from a bird's eye view don't take into account the details that go into the day-to-day operations, and it's a lot easier to make those recommendations than to actually implement them. But there are some things in here that I did want to talk about, particularly one of the recommendations on page 8 of the report that I know Mrs. King did address in her management letter to the school committee is the recommendation regarding eliminating one bus. Yeah, there's 2 buses currently covering the Monsignor Clark and Prout run, and I think there was a recommendation here to consolidate them into a 1 bus covering the run, and I know that there was obviously some areas that the auditing firm may not have been aware of. I guess my question is can that be done, and if not, why?
We are lucky enough to have Mr. Horan with us tonight, and I'm going to have him add further to the comments that were made in that letter regarding that recommendation that we consider consolidating those 2 buses.
Good evening. We've spoken about it before, that part of routing, it isn't always about the time that you have, and it's not always about the loads that you have, but there's also the time distance issue. Right now, those 2 buses in the afternoon go to Monsignor Clark, pick up their kids, go to Prout and pick up their kids. 1 bus does Route 1A, Boston Neck Road, and then the northern part of town, and a few kids over on the northwestern part of town. Pardon me. The other bus comes up Route 1 itself, dropping kids off, and then goes over into the Lafayette Road area, Autumn Ridge, up into Wickford Highlands at times. Specifically on the day that this was taken, both those ridership counts were pretty low, but it was on a day when there was a lot of sports going on there. This is a snapshot, and that's what happens. The issue being that by the time the buses get back and start dropping kids off, it's well after 3 o'clock. Both of them finish up right around 4 to 4:15, closer to 4:15. If we were to take the buses and combine them into one, my best estimate is that the last kid would not be getting dropped off, and that is if the load count was as low as it was that day. Probably 5:15, 5:30, because the bus that goes up to the north goes all the way out. It does have some kids out in Mount View when they ride, but it also has kids that live up on Forge Road. So they're basically going to East Greenwich,
Right.
For argument's sake. And then they have to go back over to the other side. And that just eats up time. And North Quidnessett Road's a long, long way to go down Fletcher Road, et cetera. And it's just a large area to cover up there. On paper, it looks like something that you could look at, but in reality, as you had mentioned before, I just don't think it would be feasible to do it. Way too late getting those kids home.
I guess the question I had is, and I don't know what our requirements are as far as providing transportation for students that are going to private schools outside the district. I don't know if it's feasible, or again, kind of getting into the whole requirement issue of these students that are going to school out of district, can we pick all of them up at a central location and drop them off at a central location? Like, I know what some buses that service other schools do that. And I don't know if that's, because I totally agree. When you get into house-by-house drop-off, and you get into the Mount View, and I'm very familiar with all those areas,
Sure.
It's a lot more of a hike than people think or it looks like on paper. And so, I don't know if we're required to provide that, or if it's something that we've always provided, or...
We are required to provide transportation to all the kids in our transportation region, which is basically the entire South County area of Rhode Island. We don't have to go to OLM, which is 4 miles up the road, but if, God forbid, no pun intended, we had a child that was that wanted to attend St. Pius in Westerly, we would be required to provide transportation to Westerly. Having said that, though, to your point about centralized location, in the morning, all of the Prout students take the closest high school bus to our high school. They transfer to bus 17. Some of them are brought there by their parents and just get directly on bus 17. But the bottom line is bus 17 then shuttles that entire load of kids down to Prout. Monsignor Clark works the same way, except it's at the middle school time frame. So all those kids come in on the middle school runs. Luckily for us, all of them go to Wickford Middle School. There's probably 4 or 5 that actually ride the bus in, and all the rest are brought in by parents. They get on the bus at Wickford Middle School and are taken down to Monsignor Clark. That works in the morning. It doesn't work in the afternoon, unfortunately.
Why not?
It doesn't work in the afternoon so well because of the times that are involved. We have to dedicate 2 buses to them. There's no way to shuttle them back up. We're going to use those 2 buses. They don't operate in the same time frame that we do. In other words, their bell times don't mesh with ours.
I see the hands. Right now, Mr. Cerisi has the floor. He'll ask us questions, and then we'll continue to get on the table. So just make sure that you keep
Madam
track
Chair?
of your questions. Yes.
I don't want to make a point of order, but I think several members have questions on that one issue. So before we move off the topic, it might make sense to continue to delve into that one, whatever the committee wants, but just suggestion.
That makes more sense.
Stay with the thrust of it.
We can do that. I want to make sure, though, most of our questions are directed towards Mrs. King or Dr. Auger, and then if they can't answer the question, they can refer to Mr. Horan. So if you, Mr. Cerisi, I'll give you the floor, and then I can recognize the other hands.
I would just, and again, I defer to Mr. Horan, certainly has far more knowledgeable on this topic than I am, but, it's something that I think it's a service that fortunately we've been able to provide in past years, and I think as our budgetary restrictions continue to tighten, we may not be able to provide the same level of service that we've provided in past years. And, I think if there's a way to do this where children might be a little bit on the early side or whatever it may be, obviously as long as there's no health and safety risk, I think we need to explore these options. And again, like I said, it's as easier for me to say and easier for this person to write the recommendation than it actually is to implement, but it's something that I'd like to see if we can delve further into as far as centralizing pickup and drop-off of the students if, in fact, we are not under any requirement to basically provide a house-to-house service for them. Even if we're going to continue to do it with 2 buses, I still would like to see us look into centralizing the drop-offs and pickups because, quite frankly, we could eliminate a lot of time and mileage. We might have to keep 2 buses on, but you can certainly eliminate a lot of time and mileage and fuel consumption.
Exactly.
So that's something that I would like to see us look into. And the last comment that I just want to make is just a general comment, and and it's something that John and I have talked about in previous years, and that I've talked to the superintendent about and past superintendents about. And again, it goes into the job that you have of trying to find that balance of making the accommodations without upsetting other groups. The layout of this town is tremendously difficult, a lot difficult than I think the more people realize, but every year, if we look to consolidate stops and have less stops and require students to walk a little bit further to bus stops, and those stops are deemed as safe stops by the police department, and we're basically just requiring students to walk a little bit further to bus stops. Those minute here and 5 minutes here, they all add up by consolidating stops. And I think our fleet would run from a time perspective, maybe not from a budgetary perspective, but from a time perspective, would run a heck of a lot more efficient. So when people, parents complain about, little Mary and little Johnny, get home at this time, and they get picked up at this time. Well, folks, I know this doesn't go over well with the parents, but there's a little give and take there. If you want your child to be picked up at your front door, and you want them home very early, something's got to give, and we got to find that balance. And again, easier said than done. I know every time, John, you've done a tremendous job trying to make some adjustments, and that first week of school, your phone's ringing off the hook, and I know my phone and other school committee members' phones are ringing off the hook about, start times or bus times. But it's people have to realize that as we continue to tighten things here budgetary-wise, and we continue to tighten the transportation operations, there's got to be a little bit of give and take. So, and this committee, quite frankly, has got to have the stomach for it, because when John makes the recommendations and makes the adjustments, your email and phones are going to be ringing off the hook. So, thank you.
Mr. Busker, and you're next. If you want to just address your questions to recommendation number 8, and then let other members comment on that, since we were talking about that, I'll be more than happy to come back to you that you won't be forfeiting your time if you wanted to talk then later on after other committee members, okay?
Sure.
So you have the floor right now.
Okay.
But I'll jump, what I would say is that once you've exhausted your question on recommendation number 8, I see other committee hands, and then we'll eventually come back to you.
In other words, after I'm done with 8, you want me to zip it? Is that what you're saying? That's
Yeah.
okay. That's all right.
I'm just saying I'm going to let other people talk.
That's okay. This is a very, very comprehensive report. It was very well laid out. It was easy to read, and I appreciate all that. Like Mr. Cerisi says, I think that where I differ from one of the things he said if this were a report that 4 of us put together, I would say, yeah, you know what, we're just looking at it from, strictly in a linear fashion, looking at, consolidate 2 to 1 and we'll save money. But this was conducted by a group, a company that does this for a living. So while they aren't intimately involved with our operation and the concerns that the daily quirks and concerns you might have on a daily or weekly basis, I think a lot of their recommendations we need to look at seriously, because as Mr. Cerisi and Dr. Ajay had mentioned in earlier meetings regarding budget, there's no longer any low-hanging fruit. So 30,000 here, 60,000 there, it's all going to add up to help us. And as far as I wish this report would have delved further into these stops per bus, stops per route, how many stops in a mile area, how many stops in a subdivision, because like Larry, I think there can be time savings, which may equate to actually augmenting your start times, Dr. Auger, if we could look at that. Because I realize squeaky wheels get their grease, but there comes a point where, we got to stop placating people just because they want their child picked up outside their house so they can watch them from the front window. There has to be a balance to that. And I think maybe if we could have something looking at the buses, stops per bus, that would help us. I would know if I'm all wet or if I have something to base an argument on. So, but thank you for the report. I look forward to looking at it in more depth and seeing how we can help you implement some of these recommendations.
Mrs. Avanzado, did you have a question about recommendation number 8?
No, my only add would be that it is.
I'm going to hold off a second. Okay?
It is about 8.
It is about 8. Okay.
It's about 8.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right.
I would just concur with Mr. Cerisi's comments that is an area that I also would be interested in at least looking at to see if it's possible in terms of maybe having a common pickup at the end of the day. We already do that, I guess, in the beginning of the day. Obviously, we can't have kids getting home at 6 p.m. or even 5 p.m. We're going to have, but at least maybe just to see what time it would be or play with it a little bit, that would be an area. This is a huge town, so a lot of problems with transportation because of the size of the town. So that's all I have to say on number 8.
Mr. Jones, I know you had your hand up at 8.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Page. And to clarify what Mrs. Avanzado said, and to ask one specific question to what Mr. Cerisi pointed, just so I'm clear, I look at the ridership and the utilization. So for the morning run, we have one group that meets at the high school and goes to Prout, and one group that meets at the middle school and goes to Monsignor Clark. It seems to me, based on the start times for Monsignor Clark and Prout, if you had the middle school students meet at the high school, I know that would be earlier for the parents to get them there, and they'd have to take a different bus to get to high school. But based on the 8 and 8:30 start times, would it be possible that the one bus from the high school could meet both the Prout and Monsignor Clark requirements if all the students met at the high school in time for the Prout run to start?
If they were all there at 5 after 7, we could get them down there well before their bell time. Whether Monsignor Clark is ready to take them that early, I don't know. But in answer to your question, yeah, we could do that.
Well, then to follow up, Prout starts at 8, so I assume that they're there before 8. Mm-hmm. And then I know it's only 2 miles, but whether they, Monsignor Clark lets them in at 8:05, or they have to sit on the bus, like I know our students who go to the elementary schools have to sit on the bus for a while. In theory, they could all be there, right?
Absolutely.
So one bus could satisfy both requirements in a very efficient manner if they all met at the high school. Thank you.
Yes.
What about the afternoon? John, can you comment on the afternoon and how that would work if we took that suggestion?
Well, we are picking up both schools. We're doing it with 2 buses, but they both pick up at Clark and they both pick up at Prout. We could put all those kids on one bus. But now we're talking about getting rid of one of those two buses. So now that still leaves the one bus to take all those kids home when they come back. If that's the will of the committee, that is not an issue. I mean,
But I'd like to hear some estimates, though, when they get home, before we do something like that. I'm not
well,
going
you're
to jump in
talking
there.
that both buses right now are done at 4:15, 4:20.
Yeah, it's going to be 5:30.
So it's going to be five,
Yep.
I'd say tack an hour on. They've got to go all the way up into, the Quidnesset area, do all that, and
That's late.
then work themselves down south. And the last stop, a lot of times, is at the southern end of Route 2, at Vineyard.
Mr. Mudge and then Mr. Busgarden.
Yeah, basically on that same topic, I would wonder, the other students going to the private schools, Proud and, what's the name? They have students going to other districts, like perhaps East Greenwich, perhaps Charahoe, Westley, so forth and so on, going to the parochial schools. So has anybody explored the distance and the time that those students are picked up and dropped off at their bus stops? In other words, maybe 4:30, 5 o'clock isn't really an issue if it's the same in other communities, and that's the price you have to pay to go to the private school.
We can certainly do a survey of the other communities.
Well, if the time is a factor, I think we should.
Mr. Busgarden, you had a question?
Yeah, just make sure I understand, because the numbers, the times that Mr. Haran's quoting, Mrs. King, at 4-something is the, 4:15 is it's finish time, but the schools actually dismiss at 2:30 and 2:40, correct? At least in this recommendation, on page 8, it says, Proud bell times are at 8 a.m. and 2:30 p.m., and then 8:30 and 2:40 for Monsignor Clark. So what you're saying is that the kids are on the bus for, an hour and almost 2 hours?
The buses roll out of Monsignor Clark right around 3 o'clock.
It'll be 2.5 hours on the bus if we changed it.
They run out,
That's crazy.
the issue becomes you have so many buses there from all the communities
Okay.
that
By the time they get the kids?
it's the loading time and all that.
Well, are we, by law, do we have to provide door-to-door service? In other words, can we drop those children off at the high school at the end of the day, so instead of you running your bus all over God's half acre to up to Forge and to, all the little remote plans out there on the point, to take time to get to?
That would be Mary's question.
Can they have a 1 or 2 stops, we drop some kids off at, for sake of argument, Hamilton Elementary, and then maybe Quidnesset Elementary, or Quidnesset Middle School. And, so you're covering the south side of the town, north side of town, and the parents pick their kids up there. I don't know. It's just an idea. I'm not asking for an answer.
Well, we are required to provide the same level of transportation to the parochial students that we do to our in-district students.
Is that a law, or is that just what we like to do?
That's the Rhode Island Department of Education regulations.
Union has that law.
John?
Some of these students, they're not door-to-door. I mean, for instance, if you have just a high school child that lives up in the Signal Rock neighborhood, we're not going to drive up in there. We're going to drop them off at the same place that we drop off our high school students. However, if you're going to go right past the kid's house on Newcomb Road, or Lafayette Road, we're going to stop and drop the child off at the house. The other thing is that now you're mixing high school and elementary kids, so it does add an awful lot more stops. I mean, you just can't look at it as a high school bus. It's actually an elementary bus, and some of those children are in kindergarten. So we don't necessarily have to bring them directly to their house, but we have to bring them, say, to the closest corner where it's safe to drop them off at.
Are there any other questions about number 8? Mrs. Clarkin.
So the issue we're talking about here is potentially eliminating one of the buses to go to the private schools. One of the issues that, we as a committee have dealt with and heard from parents was the fact that we eliminated 2 buses last fall which then affected the bell times. If we're considering all of these options, and some of them are feasible to just have one bus go to the parochial schools, is it possible to use that second bus to replace one of them that we gave up, and maybe it could affect some of the bell times starting next fall, if it's feasible? At least it's one bus that we could potentially get back.
I suppose, it may be. The problem that we are confronting, and, we'll be talking about this when the item comes up for the budget, and then when we, deal with this over the next few weeks, is that, as I presented last week, the budget I'm presenting is one where we're asking for a 4% increase, and even then, having to cut roughly $400,000 to $500,000, not add anything yet. That's what's got me worried. So returning those start times, it is something that I would very much like to do, as I indicated last week. I'm just trying to figure out a way on how to make that happen, while at the same time finding the other things that need to be cut. And, at the moment, I have some ideas about some of them, but I don't have $500,000 worth of ideas. So, before I can say with any confidence that I'm ready to put some things back, I got to be honest with you. I don't feel like that would be something that could be in the package right now until we find a lot of other creative ideas.
All right, not seeing any other hands on number 8. Mr. Busgarden, did you have a question or comment about something else within the report?
Well, no, let me think about that. Can you pass me, can I come back, can you come back to me, please?
Mrs. Avanzado.
I'm sorry, why are you calling on me?
Because I'm going down below.
Something other
And
than
you're
I was thinking, I was paying
I know,
attention.
this cut me off guard, too.
Okay, now this is general comments on the entire report?
Yes.
Okay.
Unless
Okay, I'm back.
Unless what you say sparks, another tangent.
An argument? I hope not. Okay. I have one opening question for, actually for Mrs. King. A little bit ago, I think you said, Mary, that out-of-district buses are the only ones that are outsourced in other districts. Did someone say that?
No. What I wanted to compare that to is that the out-of-district are what the buses are that are going to the statewide busing model. Some of them are going to statewide busing, so that would equate to our minibuses. Other districts do have their big buses contracted out to a first student or whatnot, but our comparison, when we've discussed statewide busing, that is our comparison, our minibuses to some districts going to statewide busing.
Okay. In general, I think this report is very comprehensive. I think it's going to be very useful to us, but I think it's going to take some time and analysis to look at the different provisions of it and see whether they are viable, because some of them I don't think, as Mr. Cerisi said, may not be viable for us for different reasons. But it's extremely comprehensive, and I'm kind of hopeful reading it that there may be some areas where we can look at it. I see where they mentioned that the contracted buses, our large buses, are achieving quite a bit of effectiveness with their runs, but an area where they pointed at were the minibuses in terms of not as many runs happening there. And one of my concerns, obviously related to the minibuses, which we've discussed before, is that we have our paras on those buses, which is one of the reasons why it's more expensive, but we also have special needs students who need paras rather than just monitors in many cases. But there may be some room there. That would require a really in-depth analysis with our special needs department in conjunction with our transportation department to see if there is any flexibility with using monitors rather than paras on some of those buses. I would not want to do that in an area where we had needs that were not satisfied by a monitor. But that's something that I noted in the report that we could look at. And the other thing that I noted was, as Mr. Cerisi talked about, was bus stop consolidation. And I know we all complain about this because when we were going to school, we actually had to walk a little bit. And now nobody walks
Uphill
at all.
both ways.
Yes, in the snow. But I kind of understand the mindset of the parents now, because just awareness of danger out there and that type of thing. I'll drive down 102 and I'll see the bus, I'll be behind the bus, stopping. And I think to myself, they could walk down, some of these kids, to a couple central points along 102. And I don't know what the willingness is going to be to do that. One of the problems is we move the start times and it's dark out when the kids are outside. So parents don't want their kids walking in the dark when the cars are coming close to the road. That's one of the concerns that the parents have. But I would like to see some bus stop review or analysis, maybe in conjunction with some of the things mentioned here. I don't think any of this is something that we can do on an immediate basis, or that we should do on an immediate basis. I think we need to look at and weigh some of the options that were talked about in this report. But thank you for cooperating with all of that. There's a lot of work in here.
I think I've seen you go through some of the flashing red lights of the buses a couple of times, but...
No, actually, I think I saw you doing that. Okay, I'm done for now. Thank you, Kim.
Just one of the things that I think should be commented on from Mrs. Avanzado's is we should report out as to what are our walking distances at the, because I know the distance, I believe for the high school, it's a mile.
It's a radial mile for the high school and middle school, and 5/8 of a radial mile for fifth grade, kindergarten through fifth, K to 5.
That's by regulation. Do we do that in all of our neighborhoods?
It's not by regulation.
No? What
It's
is
your
it?
policy.
That was policy. It's part of our
That
wellness.
policy is set by each school committee in each municipality. It's
No outside
there is-
areas set by
There is no
ride?
state requirement that sets a statewide walking distance. Yes. But that's also modified by, the traffic conditions that you run into, what kind of a road it is. You don't want a kid walking any considerable distance down Shermantown Road
Or Lafayette.
or Lafayette.
Yep.
Or, you talk about 102.
102.
The number of stops increases as the grade level decreases. They're inversely proportional. So you're going to have less high school stops on the same route going up and back than you are, say, at the elementary level.
That makes sense. Yep.
So that's something that you just can't draw that circle a mile around Davisville
Right.
Middle.
That's a good point.
And,
Yep. Elementary students you don't want
Right.
walking on certain roads at all.
And, to some extent, high school students, it's the same way.
That's true. I had one of those recently, and high school students, and they don't exactly look out for themselves either, so.
Right, as I remember, we don't have anyone who walks along Post Road. There are certain roads that you've deemed more hazardous than others, am I correct?
Correct.
Right.
Could I make a comment regarding Mrs. Avanzado?
Yes, you may.
I know we had this issue, unfortunately, last year with the Yorktown folks, so I did a lot of research on that. And in fact, I did look at that very carefully. And have we looked at the radial mile, I think, for the high school and half mile for the other kids? Have we really looked at that in terms of our bus pickups?
Well, yeah, yes, sir. We have all the walking boundaries set in the computer, and we have now altered the 1 mile boundary at DMS to exclude the Yorktown area. So they are outside the walking boundary.
Yeah, they were supposedly the radial mile. And what's funny about the radial mile is we had kids sitting over across, for example, to go to, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, they go to Fishing Cove? That could live across the bay along Route 2, but couldn't get there from the radial mile because they'd have to swim part of the way. So the radial mile is not necessarily a good indicator of that. Okay, and I think that's where the stops come in.
You have to modify it.
Yeah, so have we really looked at that thoroughly? I had looked at some, and I actually made a map up on that. So I think that's an area that we really need to address. Mr. Risi said it, talking about the, beep beeps, some of the small stops, but and some of the other things are, for example, there's limitations on speed limits, like 35 miles an hour. If you have a speed limit over 35 miles an hour, a kid can't cross the street. Okay, that's state law. That's in state law. So, but if it's below 35 miles an hour, correct me if I'm wrong, can go across the street, and the bus can stop and stop at that.
That's correct.
big
There are
part. Yeah.
areas that we don't allow that, though.
Yeah,
Even
you
though
don't,
it's-
yeah, we
Even though
don't,
it's
but-
35, the state law says over 35. So along Boston Neck Road,
Yeah.
we don't let kids cross, even though it's 35 miles an hour.
Yeah, so we're flexible with the rules, is what I'm saying.
We need a crossing guard.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's an area that we should be looking at when it comes to stops. Thank you.
We can't.
All right, Mrs. Clarkin.
I, too, think that this was a great and valuable report. I think it has a lot of substantial information here that we can look at and hopefully implement certain of these recommendations. One of the things that I noticed off the bat was the excess miles. If you, that's something that could be a conceivable amount of savings if we delve into that a little more deeply. I also think the idea that Mrs. Avanzato mentioned of seeing if we could maybe replace some paras on the minibuses, where, if it's possible, with monitors to save some costs there. But in evaluating this report and seeing how it affects our transportation, I think we should look at it from two perspectives. Number one, how can we save costs and take this information to, save money for the district, but also with the thought in mind of also using the information in this report to potentially bring back one or two of those buses and how it would affect start times. I think we've talked a lot tonight about some great ideas of looking into consolidating the bus stops, which is something that was brought up in the fall, and just going through this and seeing where we can tweak it and take this useful information to make some changes.
Just to be clear about the monitors on the minibuses, the only buses that have paras on them are the ones that actually have special education children. We have 3 or 4 that just do Compass, Kingston Hill, West Bay Christian, Quest, that use, pardon me, we have monitors on those buses.
Oh, okay. Was that reflected in the report at all?
They're aware of it. I provided that information to Transport, yes.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
Might not
Okay.
be in here, though. Thank you. For
That's
that.
important to know. Thank you.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mrs. Page. I don't want to cover some of the same ground that's been talked to, so I'd just like to maybe talk a few specifics. What strikes you when you look at some of these things, and maybe you can clarify it, because obviously we're just looking at data and charts. I mean, to have a bus that goes to Tollgate High School for one student, I mean, can you clarify what that costs us? And, I mean, is that going, I mean, obviously it's one student, I really don't want to get into specifics, but I mean, is that going away soon? Because it seems awful expensive to have a bus for one student. I mean, it strikes you when you look at utilization that's 7%. There's no way we can work around that?
There's no other districts right now that go to Tollgate close to us. That's a child that's going to a vocational program there. I believe this is her last year. As a matter of fact, I believe she's off the bus now because she started driving. So it's
So
pretty
is that
much
bus
gone
not even
away.
making a
But
run?
you have a legal obligation to take that child to school.
Right, but
And
was
that's-
there, maybe this is a larger question, is when we approved that, was there no other way, we could satisfy that student's VOTEC? I mean, I guess maybe the larger point is, in thinking of some of those things, do we consider the transportation aspect of one student? Because clearly what strikes you looking at these is, the out-of-district costs are a huge cost driver in this area. So I guess maybe that's just a general question for the moment. In looking at some of the others where the runtime, both the seating capacity and time utilization is under 60%, I mean, again, what strikes you is about a third of those are the high school. So do you have some thoughts of why that is? Is that, if we did this report a year ago, 2 years ago, would that show the same trend? Or is the fact that the start time's a little earlier, there's more parents driving? I mean, could you give us some thoughts on why the high school runs are one-third of the under 60%?
It's a very difficult question. I don't have an answer for you at the tip of my tongue. I would say that a lot of times more kids actually drive than we think are going to drive. Most of these buses are programmed well in excess of their capacity. but you don't know who's going to take the bus until you actually get out there and start picking the kids up. It also depends on what's going on, whether the kids get in the morning and the afternoon, especially the afternoon, what sports are in session, what after-school activities are going on. The high school isn't really isn't what's driving the buses, how many buses you need. It's the middle schools. So, theoretically, after we started, we could maybe combine some high school runs, but you're still going to need that bus, and you're still going to pay for that bus because you need it at the middle school level and then further on at the elementary levels.
Okay, so in looking then at the enrollment trends, and I think Dr. Zave said we've got a big bulge in 5th grade right now?
Yes, moving to 6th grade.
Right,
yeah.
so as that group moves to 6th grade, how do you see that impacting any of this? Or is it just actually going to make some of these potentially utilization numbers look a little higher?
Oh, they should go up. I mean, it's going to, all those kids are going to get shoved into the middle school. We have 47 more projected students coming into the new Crossroads facility. I also sit on the technical review committee at the planning department. There are about 150 kids to 200 kids projected over the next 2 or 3 years into some of the developments that are out there now that construction is going to start on shortly, and I'm relatively speaking shortly, not next month. So you're going to see all these kids coming into town, and you need a seat for every bottom.
In looking at, for example, the Coventry run, I mean, what strikes you is, you have 2 buses, both that have capacity, and obviously it's the time utilization, I guess, that's the issue. So is that sort of the same point, which is those 16 students are spread out so far that we need 2 buses, where, again, if we had a centralized thing, 1 bus could satisfy both?
In the morning, so that we don't start picking the kids up at about 5:30, we send 2 buses. In the afternoon, we send 1 bus over to pick them up, and that meets a bus here in town. They split up the load and then take those kids home.
Okay. So in theory, though, again, if there was a centralized meeting location in the morning, 1 bus could satisfy both. It's just that they're spread so far over that to pick them up at near the spots, because I assume those are all high school students, right?
Yes.
Okay, so they could, in theory, if they were on the high school bus runs and met at the high school, could they still get to?
They would not get to Coventry on time.
Okay.
And that's kind of what drives it.
But if they met at the high school, obviously not at the same time as the high school bus runs, or some other central location, 1 bus, from a capacity standpoint, could handle both in the morning.
Yeah, I wouldn't talk to the time point until I had a chance to look at it better, though. I mean, we don't want to start picking these kids up at 5:30.
Oh,
so what I'm saying is that if we had the 2 buses pick everybody up and then meet at a location, what time are they going to meet? Are they going to meet in time to get the kids over there? I'm not sure about the time part. I would have to look at that and get...
Yeah, I guess maybe my point being is, if it was the responsibility, I guess we can't put a responsibility on a parent to get them to a centralized location. We have to also we would have to provide a bus capability to get them to a centralized location.
Well, we don't require parents to bring...
Right, okay.
And that's
right.
the thing. It's that equality
okay.
issue that they concern.
Okay, so again, that's just sort of where being spread out all over is a limiting factor, so...
Yes. But it's certainly something we can look at again. I mean, it's...
Yeah, I agree with Mrs. Almanzano. I mean, there's probably numerous examples, and I don't want to keep, the committee's time or your time on that, so thank you.
Mr. Mudge.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up to Mr. Jones, one of his comments on Mrs. Almanzano, you don't have to provide bus service. The state law reads you provide transportation. And in fact, I read one article where they were sending the kid to school with a taxi. It was cheaper. That wasn't that wrong. But that's basically what it reads, the state law. And that makes sense, okay?
Do it if it saves money.
One of the things that really jump out at me, and I got several questions here. If you go to page 3 and 2, I'm looking at these numbers. It's costing us $1.6 million to transport our general ed kids, basically. And it's costing us $1.4 million to transport the minibus kids, which is astounding because the numbers here are something like 2,300 general ed kids and about 180 minibus kids. And I think that's indicative, and I haven't run the numbers here, but based on some of these things, it's costing us $676, according to this study, per general ed bus contract, whatever you want to call it, kids that ride the contractor buses. It's costing us $8,000 per student for the minibus children. We really need to take a look at that. That's fairly incredible to me.
Well, and I would like to see, Mr. Mudges, what the comparisons are from the state, because we don't have those yet.
Yeah, I understand now, and I agree with that, but again, there's alternatives. Again, Mrs. I'm married. I did mention that the state now, for these types of runs, and I assume that this is the minibus runs you're talking about, the out-of-district bus, their educational aid went from $1 million 2 years ago to $3 million to support communities.
Actually, I don't see that, Mr. Mudge. I know you had mentioned that before, but for the information that was provided in the governor's budget, I'm still seeing $1,154,000 spread out amongst 23 communities. Now, how they do that, I do know that they have talked about, they do want that fully funded. It was not presented in the governor's budget.
My report, the one that I have, shows that the governor's request was going in, or the Department of Ed was to increase that to $3 million.
I didn't see that as presented in the governor's budget. I see still the $1,154,000 that was presented to me from, I believe Mr. Duffy had passed it out to the superintendents.
I'll get that, unless I misread that. But regardless, my point is, and I think you can go back last year, I'm not sure you were here, when the RIDE folks came in and we talked about the Davisville Elementary School roof and so forth and so on. And when they spoke about that at that evening, and that's why I remember this, we discussed the out-of-district transportation issue. But that may be a point to go back and look at that discussion, because I think if you go back, this thing has been on our to-do list for some 4 or 5 years now. And I think it's time that we really got aggressive and looked at that.
I would also pass along some information that I have. I don't have a lot of details from RIDE, but I do know that they are wrapping up their third year of this statewide busing for out-of-district. And it has been communicated that they are going to be looking at possibly changing the way that service is now being provided, because for some of the larger districts, I think we've all heard about the troubles that Exeter West Greenwich has had with that system. They believe that they need to make some changes there to make it more workable for some of the districts. So that is actually under review as far as I understand it. And I don't know if Mr. Horan has any other information, but I think he had heard the same thing.
Yeah, well, again, I think we should look at that, and I think Mr. Welch is now on the school committee. He was a proponent of looking at that as well. He had some comments on that. So, nonetheless, I think there's a lot to look at here. So, these numbers, from $600 to $700 a child to $8,000 is just astronomical, and that just is a red flag that we need to do something there.
But also, too, Mr. Mudge, you have to understand that some of those students might have one-to-one services as well. So that would definitely add a cost that you wouldn't have with a regular education student.
Sure,
so there are some extenuating circumstances, but I would definitely like to see the comparisons on the state, and I hope to get that soon.
Well, I understand, and when I look at, bothers me, and I won't say it bothers me, it's really truly unfortunate that the kids need to take these buses, but you know, when you're talking $8,000 average, okay, for 180 kids, and $700 for the rest of the kids, I'm just wondering if there's another way. And I guess when I'm seeing in there, you know, you've got full-time minibus drivers, they're getting sick pay, they're getting vacation, I guess, and, you know, all the benefits and everything else. And you're wondering if this maybe couldn't be contracted out as well, if you may. We need to look at that, I think.
I agree, Mr. Mudge.
I think that something that's lacking in this report that I need to get is, I know that the state of Rhode Island, for many years, at least up to 2008 or 2009, kept the mileage runs for every bus and every run. So we would know if we had a run at X, if it was 2 kids on the bus and how much it costs per run per se. And I would kind of like to go back and look at the total mileage, at least going back to before Davisville Elementary School, because I had looked at this before when we actually wound up closing Wickford Elementary School. It was at that time purported, you know, we're going to make all these savings when we closed Wickford Elementary School and we consolidated some of the schools. Well, in fact, we wound up putting 3 or 4 buses back on, which was $300,000 or $400,000 basically. And the one thing that I had noticed was that we provide to the state. I'm not sure we still do that, but I know up to 2009, the insight reports that I had, we had the total amount of mileage that the district has to report to ride. Now, I don't know what detail, but I'd kind of like to look at that over the last 4 or 5 years and say, gee, did we have 10 million miles this year and 2 million miles, 8 the year before, or 12 the next year, to see what that's telling us, that information is telling us in terms of our cost, our efficiencies, and so forth. So I would like to get the profile for the past 3 or 4 years to look at, as well as get the mileage that each bus runs, we accumulate for each of the bus runs we talked in. I see that. I think it's important to have.
We can get you that data. We registered your request for that information this weekend. We can get you that data.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to follow up. You know, I appreciate all the comments, and there are some areas here that we can certainly be looking at very closely, and we will. I just want to reiterate the point that, you know, and I will post this particular data on our webpage and resend it to the committee. But, you know, you look at the per pupil expenditures on transportation, and North Kingstown does very well in the state. So I'm very pleased about that. You know, a lot of the discussion that we just had is actually in an area that this report didn't really cover in much detail, and that's the minibuses and the out-of-district piece. And, you know, one thing that I've learned in reading through this is that geography means a lot. And North Kingstown's a big footprint in terms of geography. And so when you have a situation, even just going to Prout, which isn't all that far away, but when you consider you got to take them from the northern part of town and the southern part of town, now it becomes a major ordeal, you know. And as, you know, and as we pointed out, a couple of people have pointed out, with the minibus piece, you know, we do have some exorbitant costs, Mr. Mudge, you're right. But, you know, we're finding that all around the state. And we have not gotten the data back from the state plan, for instance, we haven't just gotten anything back from them in order to compare what that number would be, so that we can say with any confidence that switching plans would save us money. As was noted just a few minutes ago, there are districts that did go with the state plan, and they're losing money in the deal. So the indications that we do have, the data that we do have on the big buses, suggests that we're doing a very good job in keeping costs low relative to the rest of the state. So that part makes me confident that while there's probably some areas in the minibuses, I'm sensing we're probably doing a similar job with the minibuses in the best we can. There's so many anomalies with minibuses that, you have one kid going far away. It costs a lot of money. That one kid may have all kinds of different special needs, and they're all unique. So it's really hard to do the apples-to-apples comparison that you can do with, well, I got to pick up, 2,000 kids, and they have to go an average of 6 miles apiece. It doesn't play out that way when you're talking about minibuses in a lot of unique situations. So,
Mr. Sweezy.
Just two quick points. One is just, again, pretty much on the same topic as Dr. Roger just discussed. Is sifting through the minutia, at the end of the day, we're in a good place, comparable to other school districts around the state. We're in a good place in per pupil cost for transportation when we compare to where we fall with other school districts in the state. Now, that's not to say, okay, there's nothing else we can do. We're in a good place. Certainly we can look at other opportunities to even improve further on efficiency, whether it be from a time-wise efficiency or from a budgetary-wise efficiency. So, it's not, again, if we were dead last, most expensive on that list, okay, I'd have a real issue, and the second and last point is again, for those who were not on the committee at the time, and for those in the community who may not remember, when the Department of Education first proposed their statewide transportation for out-of-district students, which was only, I can't remember, 3 years ago, and I know Linda remembers this, being on the committee, and I'm sure Kim does as well. They wanted us to sign on. They gave us a deadline to sign on by, and they couldn't give us a price before they wanted us to sign on to the deadline. So I certainly wasn't willing to, and I know everyone else on the committee and the administration wasn't making that recommendation, and the committee wasn't willing to sign a blank check for the state of Rhode Island to provide our out-of-district transportation. Again, sign up with us by this date and we'll tell you the cost later, And it turns out that maybe one of the few times we actually made the right decision, because it ended up costing other districts a heck of a lot more than it was originally costing them providing the services themselves. And as Mrs. King mentioned, we still don't have that data from RIDE and from the state, so we can do an apples-to-apples comparison to see if they can do a more efficient job than we can. So I'm not quite ready to make that leap and say, let's, that magical word consolidate and sign on with the state, when really they haven't shown any efficiency from a time perspective or from a budgetary perspective. And in fact, it's been inefficient. And I know that they've been talking about basically pulling back and revamping the whole thing and having another go at it again, because it's been such an inefficient mess from a budgetary and from a time perspective. So I think we would have done our community a real disservice from service-wise and budgetary-wise had we hopped on board with that.
Well, one thing that's been difficult that I know, in RIDE's defense, for example, if they're planning out the year and there are 5 students going to Meeting Street from 5 different districts, you're splitting the cost of that bus by 5. September comes along and it turns out that 3 of those students are no longer going to Meeting Street for whatever reason. You are now splitting the cost of that bus by 2. And that was something that, is difficult to plan for, especially, you need to have some contingencies when you're doing stuff like that. That was one of the big issues I know in another district that I was in, that it was not something that was clear that that's how it would operate. But it makes sense when you think about it, and that's where some districts were caught off guard.
Mrs. Avanzado.
Just very briefly, I actually had written down state plan here to follow up on Larry's comments, because that requires a trust level in the state that I do not have. I can't envision myself ever having. And maybe someday I will, but I would need to see hard data before we would sign on with a state plan. And if they revamp their entire plan, I will still need to see, hard numbers. And they kind of scolded the school committee, more than kind of. We received correspondence from the state really saying, they weren't happy that we didn't sign on. But again, the blank check to the state, that wasn't, I think, a wise decision. So I think there's a few things we can do from this report, but it's good to see some of the things that we are doing and that we didn't do, I think were validated too.
Mr. Mudge.
I just like to make myself clear is, you know, the state option is an option in itself. It is not necessarily a thing we follow, and we need to follow up with that. The thing that bothers me about that is I don't know who's rope-a-dope with us, and I think it's the state, to be honest with you, about getting the data and so forth and so on. But why I brought this up, and I do have this report here, Mary, it is from fiscal year 12, the state transportation has gone from 1.08 million to 3.2 million, and maybe that's their solution to their problem. They're pumping more money into it. Of course, we don't know that, but nonetheless, we need to be on top of that. But that doesn't mean, it'll be interesting to find out that whoever's providing that transportation, are all those folks that are doing that, are they getting, you know, health care paid for? Are they getting, you know, all these other things paid for? So it's a matter of looking at not just one option, the state, but maybe other options as well, is all I'm saying.
Agreed.
And I'll be glad to send you this.
Was that out of the governor's budget, Mr. Mudge?
This is the budget that was submitted from the Department of Education to the governor.
Okay.
Okay? And they're brought to the Board of Regents, on October 4th. It was sent on October 18th by Dave Abbott, acting commissioner.
All right. Looks like everyone's had something to say. I'd like to say something a little bit about the report. Time's up. Yeah. I will note that the report will be going out to the public, and one of the things that I want to emphasize is that when I first looked at this and I was looking through how they did their contracted bus per day, contracted transportation costs, of course, the thing that leapt out at me was that right away I saw that they have the bus monitor there at $38 a day, and then they take that through with the rest of the formula until they're breaking this out. And of course, my immediate thought was, well, we don't have a bus monitor on every bus. Those are only on mainly the elementary school. So they mention that later in the report, but what I notice is that they continue to do their graph with that number in there, and so that when you get down to the bottom here where you're talking about your cost per student and your net daily cost, it is still a cost that is factored in there. So when you read the report, you understand that. But if the average person goes to our website and merely glances at the charts, they're going to get a skewed and very high number. And I think that's one of the things that I was a little, kind of like, great, okay, we have this report, and it's not going to put out the exact accurate information. So it's in there, but you have to read everything. And I think that was one of my concerns that I did see. But one of the reasons what we did, the whole purpose of this report was to take a look at where we have savings. And one of the things that made me feel very good was with the accommodations that I talked about, basically our regular transportation that we have to schools to all of our elementary, middle, and high school. And that's where it's saying that we're doing a good job with that. The things that these little things that it's talking about is that it's talking about some of the out-of-district placements, which we've already gone up and down the table. And that is not the easy thing to solve. It is the sort of thing of what do you do when you have that one student who goes to Bradley or that one student who goes to the technical school. And obviously we're going to be working on that. But I will say that that is going to be a challenge. It is good that we know what our challenges are, because that is half the battle to be able to overcome them. So I thank you, everyone, for cooperating with them on the report and for getting that back to us in a timely manner.
John, we're here every other Tuesday night. If you're not doing anything, feel free to stop.
All right. So that brings us to the end of our transportation report, and it would take us back to the 2013-2014 audit. School budget. One thing I will say about the bus audit is while this won't be on our agenda as an unfinished business item per se, I could see where there could be from time to time that suggestions are being made via the budget or other things that are a result of this report. So so just because you don't see it on here anymore doesn't mean that you can't ask a question about the report and have it answered in a different way. So, all right, so like I said, that brings us to 2013-2014 school budget. Dr. O'Shea.
You know, as I indicated earlier, this will be a subject that I go into a lot more detail on at our next meeting, particularly in what I would be proposing to find the necessary cuts to get to a balanced budget with a 4% increase. But we left this kind of as a placeholder for tonight in the event that anyone had a follow-up question or concern for last week's conversation.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Either Dr. O'Shea or Mrs. King. I think one thing, since our last meeting has been that the governor's budget came out, and so the recommended for state aid for North Kingstown is on the order of, I don't know, you might have the exact number, Mrs. King, but
yeah, it is
160,000 more than what is in the current budget projection right now. So will you be updating your budget projections to reflect that?
No, not until the actual budget goes through. That has been our policy, and that number we will get an answer on in June. I know that there had been some issues last year, and I wasn't here for all of it, but the town was not comfortable with our budgeting the state number, and I have to be very honest with you, I'm not entirely sure I would be either, because I know some districts have been burned on that number as well, because sometimes it just doesn't happen, and the governor has to make cuts in areas.
Right, but it is accurate to the funding formula, right?
Well, no, that's another point. They don't have our March census yet.
But it's accurate based on the funding formula from the last time that RIDE presented that.
Based on what the governor wants to propose, yeah.
But it's following the last published RIDE 7-year accelerate, well, they don't want to accelerate, but it's in the third year of the 7-year funding formula.
Right.
Which shows us getting 108,000 more this year and next year.
If it gets passed.
I just think that's an issue for the committee to explore more and maybe get a sense of the town council on that too. And one more question, I wanted to follow up on Dr. Mansouri's comment on staffing and the program of studies. So for the math, I believe the committee earlier in the year approved a change or added a point something FTE for math. I guess my concern is, in the current budget, are you changing the ratio in terms of the athletic director, so reducing the amount of math FTE and weighting more the AD part of that?
I haven't made that recommendation yet. Okay. I have had discussions with Dr. Kenworthy and Mr. Haig about the possibility of proposing that Mr. Haig would take on 0.6 role as AD, and that would relegate him to 0.4. That doesn't mean that there would necessarily be a reduction in math. It just means that somebody else would pick up another 0.2. That could be part of it. But again, I have right now I'm looking at in the neighborhood to $400,000 to $500,000 in cuts. And I've talked to Dr. Kenworthy about looking at staffing at the high school. We have asked Dr. Kenworthy to do this for the last 3 years that I've been here, and probably Mr. Foley, the former principal, was asked to do that for the few years before even that. And we're getting to a point where it's really hard to find extra, the idea of extra staff. We're going to look at it very closely. We're doing it almost every day, and we will this week, and I plan to have those proposals out to you next week. But so I've had discussions about possibly moving to a 0.6 AD, but I got to see how that wraps into the entire proposal, because it just may not work. The same thing with the bus piece. That's something I want to happen, but I don't know how I make it work when the theme is reduce and not add. So I have to see how all the pieces work together.
Okay.
But it is something that we've discussed.
Thank you.
It's not in the budget yet, however.
Mrs. Avanzato.
Yes, regarding the state aid number, that is a sticky wicket that we've gotten into a couple years in a row, and I would be very much inclined to take the advice of our business director on that. We changed our budget numbers a couple of years back. I'm trying to recall the exact circumstances. The state must have changed our number 5 or 6 times prior to their actual vote. And we're trying to juggle with this number that's a constantly moving target. Again, I think maybe the wise thing to do would be to just wait until the actual number comes through. I don't think we can, or it's difficult at the very least to estimate. And it sounds like, Mary, the town has already said, or is it Mr. Emery has already suggested not?
Not for this particular year, but I did think it was an issue last year. And I have spoken to Michael about how we were looking at least this year's state aid and possible reduction in enrollment in March, and trying to make sure we were conservative there. So he's aware of that. I mean, no disrespect to the governor, but when something comes down to the wire, something ends up getting cut. And it has happened many times before. And, I think Mr. Embry knows that, it's not until the end of June, sometimes the very last day in June, when that actually all goes through.
I would feel more confident that with our state legislature that we could say, keep everything the same, and then if we got more money, that we could come back in August and be able to add things in. But I would be very reluctant to say, oh, yeah, the state's going to give us more and count on that. I do not think that ever been a useful tool in the past, that we have been burned by that, and we have been basically told by the town that we are not to do that. So I would not want to budget extra only to find out that the state isn't able to give us the money that they had promised.
Well, because every year the state does need to vote new on the funding formula. That is not something that happens every year. So the General Assembly does vote on that every year. That's not, it is part of a formula, and it's year 3 of 7, but they do take a vote on that every year. So again, it is something that hopefully will not be, but could be cut.
Mr. Mudge.
I guess I'm the contrarian again. I think we ought to follow Rhode Island General Law 16, whatever the number is, because in there it specifically says the Department of Ed was originally supposed to give us budget estimates, forecasting what we were going to get in aid, but that was changed, to say that what we should be estimating, and the recommendation, I'm pretty sure was in Rhode Island General Law, was, our estimate should reflect what the governor submits in his budget. I think that's pretty clear. And I think history will show, I know it got muddied a little bit when we had the stabilization, and the ERA funding and everything else, because one was going up and the other was going down because we were having federal money comes in. But when you added all things together, we were basically increasing. The state aid was either the same or increasing every year. So if you go back and look at the history, which I have, you'll find that in fact, the legislature, in their infinite wisdom of being politicians, always try to give you a couple more extra dollars and go have a one-upsmanship on the governor saying that they've added something, to education, so they can take credit for that. So I think the record is pretty clear that what's in the budget, in the governor's budget, is a pretty good, reasonable figure to indicate. Or to include in our budget. And as Mr. Jones just said, nonetheless, we know they're not going to take anything away from it, so it's a minimum. It should be at what we received this year. So my recommendation is going to be to show what the governor has reflected in his budget, and I'll get you the Rhode Island General Law that I'm referring to, which I don't have in front of me.
That would be great. Thank you.
And by the way, I went back with this at some point in time, and I never heard anything about the town council telling us what to put in the budget and what not to put in the budget. That is for these estimates. Yeah.
They did.
They did.
Yeah, they gave us a hard
last
time
year,
about it, Bill.
too.
They gave us a hard time about it.
I would,
I think we were sued over that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Nonetheless.
All right. Seeing no other hands,
Oh,
that
wait.
brings
I
us to...
had a couple of questions on the budget.
Yes, Mr. Mudge.
I'm concerned, I'm going to submit this to the Budget Committee, that,
Well, aren't you on the Budget Committee, Mr. Mudge?
yeah, we haven't met yet. We haven't met because of some issues for a couple of days. I'd like to pass this thing in, and it's kind of in fact, Bob, let me just pass it down, please. It's kind of an eye-opener on where we stand. And the reason I prepared this is because it's scary. It is scary. I went back and looked at last year's the adopted budget we had, and I looked at the tax money, and if I'm correct, and I stand to be corrected, and, we'd received, the town had assessed the tax value of like $67 million in 2013, which is a 2.28% increase from the prior year. So what I did is I just assumed that, and I took a scenario for fiscal year 14, and I took a 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4% a figure, and did some calculations. Okay, assuming that council was going to allow a 4% max. Okay, to what the state law is, and it goes from 67 million up to 69, almost $70 million. And so it goes basically from 0 to $2.6 million. The town council could raise taxes again, if I'm correct. So there's a span of going from one to the other. As we stand right now, if the council elected not to increase not our taxes related to our budget, but if they wanted to hold the tax increase for the town to 1%, we would have to cut right now $2.3 million from the school budget. If they restricted it to a 1% increase, we'd have to cut $1.65 million. If they eliminated it to 2%, it would be almost $1 million. And 3% would still have to cut $312,000 without any other things that, we've talked about. And the reason I'm pointing that out is, as we go forward here, I think we need to get a sense from the council on what they're anticipating here, because this also calculated, 0% increase on the town side, 0%. So this is really troubling, because we know the town's going to have, for example, the several $100,000 increase in debt service and things like that they have to have. And all that's going to impact on this. And what I fear is that, we're searching for, we're going to be looking for $1 million as a minimum of cuts we have to make. And I think the council could help us to give us a sense of what they think that they're going to have a stomach for. So this is information, and I'm going to send it to the council as well, because it's a scary scenario for the school side of the house.
Yes, I agree, Mr.
If
Mudge.
I'm
We
correct.
understand that every percent is about $450,000.
Well, I'm talking, the town's $670,000.
Yeah,
Okay.
but to our side, a percent over last year is about $450,000.
Yeah,
So we
but
understand
I guess
that.
what I'm saying is, in our budget, we asked for $46,060,000.
Mm-hmm.
The prior year, we had $44,289,000. Okay? Am I right?
Yep, that's correct.
So the difference is, and the difference is $1.771 million we're asking the town, if you get down to line 16.
Right.
Of tax money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? What I'm saying is, the town's limited on the threshold of the tax money that they can they can go to 4%, obviously, and that's what brings this whole scenario into light here. And I like to see the town, myself, fill in what they think their part of the overall 4% town-wide tax rate is going to increase is going to be, because it's going to fall back on us heavily, strongly, and we've got to be prepared for that. And we have a few months to do that, but it's something really to look at as a warning sign.
Mr. Mudge, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we are at that precipice where it is the sort of thing of education as we know it will not be the same anymore. We are looking at after-school activities. We are looking at teachers in critical areas. I mean, we have schools that RIDE has classified as typical, and we have schools that are not up there. So it's the sort of thing of this isn't even looking at getting these schools on good ground where we are making sure that everything is going well. It's like, how do we move ahead? How do we make sure that we have kids who pass their kneecap test, who are making sure that they go through graduation? We're not even talking here about the fluff things. I had a student at Democracy Night and was like, oh, could we not do the talking about sports and music this year in cuts? And I'm thinking, you don't understand. I mean, I would love not to have to talk about those, but we have so little that we can talk about in terms of, when we look at our pie chart, there is hardly anything there. So, Mr. Mudge, I hope that, you will continue to advocate that this budget, as you show it on here, and I'm not sure exactly on your numbers, but the 0%, 1%, 2%, 3% are all going backwards. It is not that we will get to do anything that we can even argue about where the vision is. It is all, oh my gosh, where do we take it from? Mrs. Avanzato.
My way of thinking, even if the council gave us 2%, and I'm not sure, because that's kind of in the middle, is we're facing $1 million of cuts.
Yes.
And we have to start to address that now.
Mrs. Avanzato.
I would definitely agree, and this is something that we've been saying from this table for a long time. I happen to have with me the page from the May 1st, 2012 Town Council's adopted budget from the town budget off the website. I printed it with me, printed it and took it with me. And it's exactly, of course, as we have been saying for a couple of years, people think that this is an empty discussion or an empty threat about the level of cuts we're talking about. I don't think maybe they see the impact of some of the cuts we've already made, like cutting the entire hockey team, like cutting the gymnastics team, which has been here since I went to school here, and a lot of kids utilize those activities to get to college and or become an Elizabeth Beisel. You can't have that if you don't have the team. So, and that's just that's just the tip of the iceberg among the things that we've cut and consolidated administrators and raised everybody's co-pays and flatlined salaries. I mean, we have done a lot of work over the last 4 or 5 years. It's undeniable when you look at these budget numbers. It's just undeniable. And we've been held flat 2 years out of 4 years. And one of those 2 years, we had a decrease. So this is why we're in the circumstances that we're in. And your numbers, Bill, are right on the money from the budget page that I have right in front of me. You obviously got them right from there. And the impact you're talking about will be felt. So, the town is in a tough situation as well. We're all in a tough situation. But myself, I would ask that the town consider taking as close to a zero as they possibly can and make some cuts there, because we've taken the zero 2 years, and we can't do it again without really affecting education drastically. And that's coming from a fiscal conservative. So it is what it is. The numbers are what they are.
But see, what we need to do is at least get a bottom line from the council, because as I understand it, our debt service is going to go up by like $300,000 or $400,000.
They need that, but other than
so that takes and adds, to these scenarios. That it's got to be absorbed on here. And by the way, I was going to pass this out. I updated it today. I just sent it to Bob the other day. And this is something I wanted to bring up at the Budget Committee meeting, which we didn't have. But so these are the things that I think we're going to be facing in the Budget Committee and looking into these various scenarios. And I think we have to start looking at the worst-case scenarios and start kind of working back to really be prepared on making these some of these decisions. So that's it for me.
All right, that brings us to the end of our meeting, and we're at citizens' comments. Ms. Berglund, do we have anybody who has signed up in our vast audience? All right. That brings us to the end of our agenda.
I offer a motion to adjourn, Madam Chair? Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, I will hold off.
Oh, I'm sorry. I know usually reports is, we don't talk about, I guess I can ask it after. I just had a thing on, I was just noting on the security stuff, for a district our size, it seems pretty well-behaved students in general. For the number, I don't have other benchmark comparisons, but it would seem, I just have a small question on some things where maybe we've identified the person. Is that covered by insurance, or do we actually go after the group? Or
If the perpetrator is identified, we do go after them as best we can. We are not always told who the perpetrator is. I don't know if there are any other things that we can do. Should we identify someone, we do try to get the money. I do know that we had a couple of those when I started. Anything over $1,000, we would go to the trust clearly unless we can get restitution from whoever committed the vandalism.
I will say that Mrs. King and I had a discussion on this afternoon, and we cannot keep somebody's diploma from them. We cannot keep somebody from graduating if they haven't paid their fees, but we did discuss some other alternatives of ways to be able to get somebody on a payment plan if they damage something, to be able to get it back. So,
Just definitely look into that.
Yes, Mr. Biscardi.
Ms. Page, you were talking about what you can't withhold, but is it true that, maybe it's not, what about if there's a library book, textbooks that aren't turned in?
I've dealt with this a number of times, and you cannot withhold a diploma. You may be able to withhold the graduation ceremony itself, but not the diploma.
Okay, that's all right. Maybe that's the
right
delineation.
And usually something like as important as a graduation ceremony to a student and their family is enough to get that. But by law, you cannot withhold someone's diploma.
But you can if you could do the same here then with.
Well, I see your
You may be looking at cases where this is several years away, too, if you have...
No, that's fine, and that's fine. That's what spreadsheets are for.
Right.
I just saw our attorney kind of grimacing, so I'm not sure.
Some of these cases will end up right in front of RIDE at a hearing, and
Usually
on
graduation day.
yeah, well, that's graduation, but you would never hold a graduation for a book.
Well, and just to kind of reiterate what Bob was saying, there's no way to really know, but if this is good or bad, but it does look like you almost cut it in half from 03, 04 to 10 and 11. So, I mean, that's saying something. So that's good. It's went from 19.1 down to 10.9, so that's almost in half.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the table to adjourn. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Meeting is adjourned.